Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive literary paradigm shift. We're talking about source material that challenges literally everything we thought we knew about one of literature's most famous orphans. We're cracking open Jane Eyre, but through a totally different lens, one that reveals we might have been completely manipulated from page one. So, get ready, because this is going to shift your entire perspective. You know, from the very first time we open that book, we're led to believe Jane's early life at Gateshead was just a nightmare of relentless torment. She's presented to us as this poor, helpless orphan, totally despised by her Aunt Reed, constantly bullied by her cousin, and entirely isolated. And it's that emotional foundation that frames our sympathy for, well, every single decision she makes later in life. But the source text forces us to step back and ask one absolutely crucial question. Was she really abused? I mean, her own narration practically demands our pity. She insists, "I shall remember how you thrust me back, roughly and violently thrust me back into the Red Room." The analysis we're digging into today argues that this is actually a brilliant narrative construction. It's perfectly designed to extract unconditional sympathy from you, the reader, basically forcing you to fully align with Jane's worldview. But what if that whole foundation of suffering was, well, kind of a lie? Now, maybe not a conscious lie told by the character, but a lie constructed by the narrative itself. Today, we're stepping completely outside of Jane Eyre's emotional consciousness. We're going to look strictly at the hard facts as they're presented in the text to see if the basis of her victimhood actually holds up under scrutiny. So let's get into section 1, the substance of abuse, where we compare the material facts of the story against Jane's emotional filters. There is actually a massive contrast between what we feel as readers and what the text literally says. Let's look at the material conditions of Jane's life at Gateshead. The text flat out reveals she wasn't starved, she wasn't beaten, she certainly wasn't forced into hard labor. Actually, by 19th century standards, she lived really comfortably. She had her own bedroom, she shared meals with the family, and she was constantly attended by servants. And the craziest part? The proof of this comes from the most unlikely source imaginable, her horribly cruel cousin, John Reed. He essentially serves as a hostile witness here. Right in the middle of bullying her, he inadvertently confirms her standard of living. He outright tells her that she eats the exact same meals they do and she wears clothes that his mom pays for. He's trying to be vicious, but he's actually proving that she isn't materially deprived at all. This brilliantly highlights the author's underlying strategy. Think about it. If Mrs. Reed truly, deeply hated Jane, why didn't she starve her? Why didn't she banish her to sleep in the servants' quarters? Because if she had, Jane would be an undeniable victim of objective physical abuse. By specifically avoiding physical abuse, the author roots the entire story in emotional abuse. And the thing about emotional abuse is, it's subjective. It allows Jane's voice and her specific interpretation of events to completely control how we feel. Moving on to section 2, rethinking the Red Room. Was this genuine trauma or just standard discipline? Let's strip away the emotional manipulation for a second and map out the actual timeline of that famous incident. It starts with a fight. John throws a book. Jane fights back. For a few hours, she's confined to the Red Room as a punishment. While she's in there, she has a severe panic attack. But look at what happens in the days right after. Mrs. Reed calls for a doctor, not once, but twice. When you break it down like that, what we're actually looking at is pretty standard 19th century discipline, followed up by surprisingly responsible medical care from the exact same aunt we're conditioned to hate. But listen to how Jane interprets that care. She complains that because she received the apothecary who treats the servants, rather than the fancy physician who treats the Reed children, she's somehow being terribly victimized. It's wild. You have a 10-year-old child twisting genuinely good treatment into a crime. Her logic basically boils down to, well, you didn't give me the absolute best, so therefore you're my mortal enemy. And that twisting of reality brings us right to section 3, the psychological diagnosis, and what the source calls the cult of the perpetual victim. The analysis introduces a really fascinating psychological concept here called victim identity fixation. It's this phenomenon where someone learns to play the role of the sufferer to gain attention, sympathy, and moral superiority. And the catch is, they require themselves to remain permanently sick or wounded to maintain that status. This idea perfectly explains Jane's underlying motivations. Think about it. If she recovers from her trauma, or if she admits that Mrs. Reed actually provided for her, she loses her moral high ground. She literally has to maintain her status as the wronged party. When we apply this diagnosis to the text, Jane hits every single symptom. She claims to be ill for several weeks after the Red Room incident, yet there are absolutely zero physical aftereffects. She endlessly repeats the story of her trauma to reinforce her identity to anyone who will listen. She point-blank refuses to forgive Mrs. Reed. The text reveals a child who learned to weaponize her own sorrow, rather than a genuine, helpless victim. Which brings us to Section 4, the deathbed testimony, the final proof. The ultimate exoneration of this so-called evil aunt actually happens at the very end of Mrs. Reed's life. On her deathbed, Mrs. Reed has absolutely no reason to lie. She owes Jane nothing. If she was truly the monster Jane describes, just think about what she could have done. She could have easily destroyed the letter from Jane's wealthy uncle. She could have taken the secret of Jane's potential fortune right to her grave. But she doesn't. Instead, she freely hands over the letter and the address. She actively enables the massive inheritance that completely changes the trajectory of Jane's life. Honestly, a true mustache-twirling villain just wouldn't do that. Yet, despite being taken in as an orphaned infant, raised for 10 years, fed, clothed, and then ultimately enriched by her aunt's deathbed confession, listen to how Jane describes Mrs. Reed to Mr. Rochester way later in the novel. She says, "She cast me away." Her verdict remains brutally, stubbornly unforgiving. She's completely willing to forget every single kindness that doesn't fit into her personal narrative of absolute suffering. And this exposes the ultimate hypocrisy laid bare by the source text, a massive forgiveness double standard. Just look at the comparison. On one side, you have Mrs. Reed, who provided housing, education, and literally handed Jane the key to her inheritance. Jane's verdict? Unforgiven. On the other side, you have Mr. Rochester, a man who actively attempted to deceive her and drag her into an illegal bigamous marriage. Jane's verdict? Forgiven. She ruthlessly condemns the woman who practically raised her, but she eagerly excuses the man who tried to trap her. So as we wrap up this explainer, we're left with a major paradigm shift. The Gateshead chapters aren't some pure, objective recording of reality. They're a carefully crafted construction of suffering. It just goes to show how easily a biased narrator can manipulate our sense of truth and completely blind us to the facts sitting right in front of us. But it also leaves us with a really provocative question to ponder. If the narrative successfully manipulated us into believing the myth of Gateshead, what really happened at Lowood School? Was that supposedly miserable charity school the one that somehow taught young girls French, piano, and painting just another brilliant deception? Keep questioning what you read, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.